Well, what we're going to do, and somehow it didn't show up on here, it's communication skills and then conflict management in a cross-cultural setting. Since most of you are going to be within the context of missions, we are going to talk about it within that context. So, and the reason why I put conflict management and not resolution is because sometimes conflict can't totally be resolved, right? So how do you live within that? But how can you use your best skills to manage it? So we're going to be talking about both of those things, all right? So, but first what I want you to do is at your table with your partner here, I want you to sit back to back, and we are going to be in drawing class.
Yay.
Oh, my favorite. Sit back to back like this?
So sit back to back so you can't see what each other is drawing.
Oh,
And what I would like you to do is I would like you to not say what you're drawing, but describe what you're drawing, all right? So your best way to do this is in the use of shapes, all right? So if I think about this, I want you to draw a circle on the bottom of your sheet. On top of that circle, I want you to draw another smaller circle. On top of that circle, I want you to draw another smaller circle. On top of that, I want you to draw a thin rectangle. On top of the thin rectangle, I want you to draw a square. All right, so you get it?
Mm-hmm.
All right. So what I want you to do is, one of you is going to be the communicator, one of you is going to be the listener. Both are drawing the picture. All right, so you're both going to draw the picture, but the communicator is going to be describing what they're drawing, and the listener is going to draw what they are describing. Okay? So, listeners, you're just listening,
And drawing.
no talking. You're listening and drawing, no talking as the listeners. Okay? But what would make this easier?
Describing it.
Okay, if you could get the big picture, right? That would make it easier. What else would make it easier?
Watching as they draw.
Yeah, watching as they draw would obviously make it easier, but most communication is not visual, so it's still a little bit more challenging. But what else could make it easier? As a listener, what did you wish you could have done?
Ask more questions.
Yeah.
Yeah, ask more questions, right?
Where we were going.
I couldn't hear her actually.
Ask some clarifying questions.
It's not you, it was everybody down here.
Yeah. So if you could ask some clarifying questions, if you knew the big picture, what else?
Well, if you knew how big this thing would be. I guess that'd be a clarifying question. Never mind. Because
Yeah.
sometimes you start off drawing in a weird place in the paper, and then it ends up being like expanding this.
Okay, good, but more
Yeah.
details, right?
Yeah.
So a few more details would be good. And not assuming, that's probably a big thing, is there's the assumptions. I mean, you guys didn't really make too much of that, but a lot of times there's assumptions that get made. I mean, here a little bit, the lines going down, there was an assumption. I think I know what you mean, and so we draw it because we think we know. So even for the listener to repeat back, okay, here's what I hear you saying. Is this what a square looks like for you? All right? So what does that look like? Okay, so what I'm going to have you do is switch. So one will be the communicator, the listener will become the communicator, and the communicator will become the listener. And what you're going to do is you can now use different skills. Okay, so now you can give the bigger picture. You still can't look at it because that's not communication. So you still have to do it back to back. But you can ask questions and you can banter back and forth back at a little bit more this time. Okay?
I like that.
Go for it. Remember thinking more details is good, big picture is good, asking questions.
Yeah.
So there's a couple of things with this. The first thing is to realize that communication actually takes a lot more work than you think it does. And this is really, really significant because I think what happens a good chunk of the time, if you think about any movie, any romantic comedy, what goes wrong?
Communication.
Communication, right? It is a classic standard plot of a movie. And you're sitting there in the movie theater going, just say it, just talk, you know. And really, when it comes to communication, communication takes a lot of effort. It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of listening skills. It takes a lot of question asking. It takes a lot of being willing to actually draw people out. And so because of that, we actually get lazy. And then that leads to miscommunication. And then when miscommunication happens, relationships start to break down. And so there's a couple of things with this. The first things we have to realize is that communication just takes time and we need to give it that time. The second thing is you need to give a lot of grace with each other. Because you may be saying it's a hoof-like thing, but if the other person doesn't know what a hoof looks like, you're going to have grace for each other and not assume that that other person is wrong in what they're hearing. It could be you and how you're communicating, right?
Yeah.
So it's both. There's need for that. I think the other thing is we have to learn how to become good question askers. That is one of the key things to communication, is knowing how to ask questions. Proverbs says that the heart of a man runs deep, but a wise man knows how to draw it out. All right, so let's talk a little bit about communication, and specifically in a cross-cultural setting. So all of us, no matter if we're from different cultures, if we're different personalities, there's a whole lot of diversity that is going on constantly. It's not just cultures, it's also just bottom line personalities. So God creates diversity, but He expects us to work together. So it's possible. I actually take great hope in that. Because with what I do and going into some situations that are a little bit more complicated, where miscommunication is flowing like the rivers after the winter, it's very easy to get discouraged in the fact that, is this possible? I'm almost to the point sometimes where I think good communication, we should call the Vatican, because a miracle occurred.
That's funny.
You know, there is some truth to that. So it's hard, it's not easy. And so but with a few tools, I think it can be easier.
Yeah.
And it's possible. So we're one body, but with many parts, so we need each other. And because we need each other, we're going to have to learn how to communicate. You're going to have to learn how to communicate when you're in ministry, in work, in marriage. I mean, in every circumstance, communication is necessary. There is no place where it's not important. Ephesians 4:1-3 gives us a little bit of four points of how to work together a little bit smoothly. And one of the four things that he says, maybe if somebody can look that up, Ephesians 4:1-3. Let's just take a moment and read that.
I, therefore, a prisoner for the Lord, urge you to walk in a manner worthy of the calling to which you have been called, with all humility and gentleness, with patience, bearing one another in love, eager to maintain the unity of the Spirit and the bond of peace.
So he says 4 things. What are the 4 things? Right there. Humility.
Bearing one another.
Good. Humility is just this idea that to consider somebody else, just to consider somebody else. To not consider yourself more important, to not consider yourself less important, but to consider others and to make sure that you're taking them into account. And so it's that sense of, my way is not always the right way. I have to be open to somebody else's opinions. I have to be able to hear somebody else's side. If we have no humility, we won't be able to be good listeners. There's almost a 0% chance of being a good listener if there's pride in our hearts. Gentleness is just be nice. Use your words nicely. Use nice words. Use kind words. All right? You can be in an argument. You can get heated, but use kind words. It talks about this in fair fighting in marriages. You know, it's okay to be in conflict. It's actually good to be in conflict. Conflict leads to intimacy. So conflict is not the enemy. All right? But our words can be the enemy because things get said that we wish we could have taken back. So even in the midst of a fight, even in the midst of a conflict, we still want to use kind words. We still want to use words that will build up and not tear down. The next one is actually patience, and this, when I went through a lot of stuff that I was doing with Ephesians for spiritual warfare, with Mark, with Greek, I was actually a little frustrated right at the beginning because he told me patience, that word patience, is actually patience with your surroundings. It's patience with your environment. I always thought it was patience with people, but it's actually not. Forbearance is patience with people. All right, so there's both. It's patience with your surroundings and then patience with people. And I thought, well, wow, man, it kind of wrecked my whole teaching. So then I was like, okay, I don't get this. How can this lead to unity? How can patience with your surrounding lead to unity? And it didn't take me too long to think about any team I've been on. And when people start losing patience with their surroundings, what? They get whiny, they get negative, and it pulls everything down. All right? And so even in our communication, if we're not patient with our surroundings, our words can really either tear people down or build people up. So are we patient with our surroundings? Are we patient with the environment that we're in? And then the other one is forbearance. That's patience with people. Can we be patient with everybody's quirks, everybody's little idiosyncrasies, because we all have them? All right? One of my favorite sayings is, some days you're the statue, and some days you're the pigeon.
Yep.
Right? So we all need to be patient with each other, because one day you're doing something to me, but the next day I'm probably going to do something to you. All right? And so we have to have that patience. And we're going to talk about things that maybe in conflict, areas of people's lives that are good to point out. But we don't have to point out everything. And not every little thing that we have trouble with somebody needs to be addressed. Sometimes we just need to get over it. And we need to ask God's perspective on it. And we need to figure out how to maybe negotiate life with it. All right? Because that person's, if they change, then they're going to lose who they are. And we don't want that. Right? So some of those little things, all our strengths, you guys, have a weakness. Mm-hmm. Every one of them. And those things, if we're so worried about those little things of people, we're going to be picking apart people in a way that I don't think God intended. You learn this in marriage. It's like if Mark was like, there are times where I wish Mark was more like me. But as soon as I think that, then I would lose this whole aspect of who he is, and that's why I married him. So it would not be good for him to be more like me, right? So I have to figure out how to handle life within the realms of who Mark is. All right? Conflict just is. Conflict is never, ever the enemy. All right? How we handle conflict, that's where we get in trouble. Conflict is actually healthy. You want conflict on teams. You don't want everybody being a yes person. You actually want conflict. You want conflict in a marriage, because it actually takes you deeper into relationship with each other. Conflict, even in relationships, is actually very healthy. If you can go past that, you will actually go to a deeper place of intimacy with people. So conflict is not our enemy. And conflict is simply just is. It's like the air we breathe. We're going to have it. And they're just innocent misunderstandings a lot of the times. I mean, even if you think about global things, sometimes it's just as simple as some of this stuff. All right? It's innocent misunderstandings. It's unmet expectations. It's that idea, I expected something, whether I communicated or not. I had this expectation. You didn't meet it. And now we have a conflict. There's a failure to get all the facts. This one is by far the biggest thing. Sometimes we don't even need to resolve conflict. We just need to ask a few clarifying questions. And then once we know we have all the facts, we realize we're actually not in conflict. So I always think when people are in conflict, I always say start there. Start by making sure you have the right information and you know what you're actually in conflict about. All right? Minor irritations that can become big problems. That's also will lead to conflict. And personality, culture, and value clashes will lead to conflict as well. I would maybe add another one in the fact that I think the enemy likes to stir things up too. In the fact that sometimes it's just the enemy, and you have to identify that to some degree, going, okay, what is going on here? And let's be aware of what the enemy is doing in that. Now, he's probably using any of those things, all right? But sometimes it is just a matter of spiritual warfare.